Right now, there's a quid pro quo. There's a symbiotic relationship between China and America in terms of the currency war, the currency grid. So the U.S. sends China all their jobs. China sends America all the dollars that they get for all the products that they sell at big box stores like Walmart. And there's a bit of equilibrium there. But what China is seeing is, as the world reserve currency U.S. dollar now at 59% of transactions, as you point out there in that statistic, it seems like it's going to go lower and lower and lower. Once it goes under 50%, then you can no longer claim it is a relevant world reserve currency. So they're preparing for that. They're preparing for that in three ways. Number one, a central bank digital currency they've already announced. Number two, they are opening the importation of gold again. They do this periodically. Hundreds of tons of gold are now finding their way back to China. Number three, they've reversed their position on Bitcoin, as I said that they would, as I said that they must. Because if they want to escape U.S. dollar as world reserve currency, if they want to escape the ability of the U.S. to censor the dollar and apply sanctions whenever they want to control the world while they're printing all that money. It's not necessarily that China disagrees with America's foreign policy or that China disagrees with America's domestic policy. It's that China disagrees with America's monetary policy. They don't want all that money printing. So a few things are going to happen. Number one, it's a hash war or a global race to procure as many Bitcoin as possible now on the geopolitical level. China is leading the way. This is the Sputnik moment for Bitcoin. America can enter the hash race or it can be left behind. Number two, as I've said very, very publicly now for almost 2 years, the central bank digital currency of China, when it is issued, it will have some backing, if not outright, partially in gold. That's what will make it very, very different than any of these other projects that are being announced. And that will allow something to happen. The dollar can collapse, but the gold and Bitcoin will rise commensurately. So it gives them protection against a collapsing dollar. The China is saying, sayonara, we're no longer attached to the dollar. And this is the beginning of the hash wars.
Yeah, well, I think the hash war in 2021 is what the opium war was back like 100 years ago during the British Empire days. You know, as they acquire hard currency, Bitcoin and gold, a lot of it is to do with, they see the Thucydides trap. It's not just us here on Keiser Report or, people that we read online, heterodox thinkers. Obviously China has to see it themselves. They must realize that since it was revealed that they're far ahead in high tech, like 5G and now 6G and artificial intelligence, that there would be some consequences to that. So how do you protect yourself from sanctions when, you own $4 trillion in your reserves and you own, all sorts of bonds from America? Well, then you have to make sure to protect yourself holding gold, holding Bitcoin. So in terms of the gold, according to Reuters headline, China opens its borders to billions of dollars of gold imports, that there will be 150 tons imported in the next month. By May, they said that it should be reported about 150 tons at the private banks, their import. But in that story from Zero Hedge, what they had pointed out in terms of the central bank digital currency. Just last week, China became the first major economy to unleash a central bank digital currency, cementing its trailblazer status in virtual currencies far ahead of other countries, after already recently experimenting with large-scale trials of actual payments by consumers, which was met with mixed results. Also last week, Peter Thiel warned that Bitcoin should also be thought of in part as a Chinese financial weapon against the U.S. It threatens fiat money, but it especially threatens the U.S. dollar.
Right, it does threaten fiat money, as we've been saying on this show for 10 years, actually. So, yes, China realizes that the U.S. dollar's days are numbered, and it probably will collapse pretty soon. And yes, they are importing now hundreds of tons of gold. What's not being talked about, which is my unique prediction at this time, is that the new central bank digital currency will have a reference or a backing by gold. And this is why I don't totally dismiss gold. And I'm not in the camp of, well, Bitcoin is going to demonetize gold completely. No, I think in the case of China, which is the biggest economy in the world right now, they're going to transition to Bitcoin through a path that is laid with gold bricks, right? They're not going to go yuan Bitcoin. They're going to go yuan gold Bitcoin. It's going to take a few years. So gold still has a place out there for that very reason. And the U.S., Peter Thiel is a bit of an alarmist here, saying that China is taking an aggressive stance. China's not taking an aggressive stance. China's doing just what an average business person would do if one of their vendors is going belly up. They would take precautions against it. The U.S. can stop themselves from committing financial aside against themselves if they want to. They seem to be preoccupied with other things, but don't blame China for doing the obvious thing.
Well, I mean, you could say that the U.S. is doing the obvious thing too. If you know you're not going to be able to pay your debt, and I've seen loads of friends or a family go bankrupt, and what do? When they know they're going to go bankrupt, you rack up a whole bunch more debt as fast as you possibly can while you still can, and then you shut it all down. Because why not get an extra 100,000, 200,000, or in this case, $200 trillion worth of free stuff and free goods? So it makes sense there. But in an event of a reset, it's not just us saying it. It's not just China acting toward it. And it's not just the United States racking up debt in sort of preparation for it. The IMF is saying we're going to have a great reset. Davos man is saying we're going to have a great reset. They're all preparing for it. They're telling us, they're warning us if you just listen. So if in that sort of circumstance, of course, you would hold gold that has been around for 5,000 years, and you get your hands on whatever Bitcoin you can get your hands on, because that will certainly be very useful for for somebody like China, especially. They export huge quantities of goods and services, so especially goods. So if you're exporting like that with large quantities, Bitcoin is a great settlement layer. So there might be a new settlement layer, and this might be, there are alternatives popping up to SWIFT, but Bitcoin is the one that's tried and tested.
Right, make a good point there. There's an enormous amount of trade, and that is the global settlement layer. The transaction is the verification. The transaction is the settlement. You don't need a third party. You don't need the new Fed of New York. You don't need the American banking system at all. Remember, all transactions around the world, particularly in the commodity markets, they must go through the New York Fed, downtown in Manhattan, every single transaction. So anytime the U.S. wants to apply sanction against any country, they simply say, well, for this microsecond 3 months ago, dollars went through our New York Fed system, therefore we're going to sanction you. That's the trick they used against Iran. That's the trick they use against all these countries, because they've got a monopoly on this. And China and other countries are saying, you know what, game's over. It's not worth it to us anymore. We're not going to sell you really cheap stuff at Walmart anymore. And by the way, what's happening to prices for soap, soda, basics, gas, but they're going up. There's inflation because China is actually raising prices now because they're squeezing the U.S. economy in several different ways. And again, don't blame China, y'all. America could have stopped this themselves.